Alright, I'm Amy. I'm here to show you preflats turned in top stitch. I cut out this on this fabulous fabric that my husband has made. It's French terry. This one is the Happy Hippo's newborn. It's 2 layers. I have the insert that I'm going to sew in with a layer of hemp fleece underneath. This is bamboo French terry. I had seen on the boards a lot of people ask about turning in top stitching. A lot of people are new at sewing, a lot of people are new at diapers, and a lot of people don't have sergers. So I have a couple of points I want to make that we can do this without a serger. I have a sewing machine over here from 1963 that we're going to sew on. And I also wanted to do a comparison of a couple of different patterns. This one is the Happy Hippos with this insert that we're going to attach. The other one that has been tossed around on the boards is the Rocket Bottom. That one is sized. And I printed that out, and it's hard to compare it to this to know what size I needed. My little boy is not quite 20 pounds, it's about 17, 18 pounds. He's almost 7 months old. The newborn Happy Hippos fits him great, good leg seal. So when I was comparing that to the Rocket Bottom, I didn't know where to compare it to. So this is the newborn Rocket Bottom, and they do have a preemie. And what I did is I matched up the rise portion, but then you see that the back is really a lot shorter than that. So I was like, well, it's probably a little short for my little dude. So I cut out the medium, and this portion is quite the bit bigger, but when you compare the part that the wings, it's about the same. Theirs goes all the way to a toddler size. It's substantially a little bigger, and it has preemie, so it's a pretty awesome pattern. What I didn't like about it is it's an older pattern, so there was no layers to take out. So when I printed it all out, it was kind of a mess, and then I had to go back and print it in color so I can tell my lines apart, because originally I had done it in black and white. And then, and I had made these before, these are the juice box ones. And you can see they're a little bit more compared. I know it's hard because they're all kind of the same color fabric, but it's pretty much the same in the size. However, the juice box are not designed to be turned in top stitched. If we're going to turn in top stitch these, we need to add a seam allowance. The Rocket Bottoms and the Happy Hippos have the seam allowance for the turning in top stitch. The Happy Hippos has the built-in boosters that were really awesome. When we cut it out on French terry, I'm really bad about wanting to cut out to show off my fabric, depending on where I think that looks the best. They're pretty stretchy in either direction, but the greater stretch is going to go on the wings. The juice box, it calls for 3 layers. I'm going to do some finagling here in a minute, and I had enough fabric left over that I think what I'm going to do, instead of 3 layers, because the first time I made them, I did it with 3 layers. I thought it was a little thick. I didn't like the way it just lost a lot of the stretch, because it was just too thick. So I have this left of the fabric when I cut, just some throwaway, and I'm going to kind of finagle me a half flat to lay in there, so I can kind of tri-fold it in there, probably with some more of this fleece, and see how that works. So when we turn in top stitch, we want right sides together. But the first thing we have to do is our insert, and again, we want right sides together. I like the jersey side of my fleece out This one's going to be a little bit easier because we're not going to sew the bottom. But especially when you're new dealing with these stretch fabrics, I would suggest you clip a lot because fabric crawls. And the important part, especially when you're doing these curves and you're dealing with two different weights of fabric, we've got the heavier fleece and the lighter French terry, is you really want to make sure you cut it out correctly, evenly. And then we're just going to kind of line it up and on the curve. And when you sew this for yourself, nobody's ever going to know how many clips that you put on there. Alright, we're going to walk it over here. Alright, I'm using this sewing machine. It's a New Home. This was my mother's grandmother, her Granny Edith's. It's really cool. From 1963. I have put up the receipt. She paid $299 for this. I picked this machine because earlier I was sewing on really thin fabric and it was being eaten by the machine. And this machine has this needle plate. It has a single hole in it, which makes it to where the fabric can't be sucked down in there. I changed it out for the zigzag foot. On this particular machine, it has no markings for the seam allowances. And even when it does have seam allowances, if you look here, there's no 5/8. So I don't really use this for things that need particular exact seam allowances. This machine is really cool because it has all the little cams on it. Granny Edith has all her stuff like it was a brand new machine. The cams go in here. I thought maybe it would have an edge foot, but they're just decorative. Alright, so on older machines, the stitches are really tight. Don't think of stitch length as being length as in distance. Not even on a lot of newer machines. Stitch length is the amount of thread that is released for each stitch. So the thinner the fabric, the smaller the stitch. The thicker the fabric, the longer the stitch. And they kind of balance out. Okay, your feed dogs technically gather fabric. They're pushing the fabric along. So your creepy crawly fabric, you want to put on the bottom. The bigger fabric, when you're doing clothing, you put on the bottom. Like the back of fabric. Like your back is bigger than your front, so you put the back on the bottom. Because this is always kind of gathering. So on this, the French terry is more stretchy. I'm going to put that on the bottom. This machine originally was for a knee press. And we've added a little length to the wires, and now I use it on the foot. I'm going to back tack it really good. And when you turn and top stitch, where you're going to turn, and this is our opening, you want to back stitch it really well, because nothing will piss you off more than when you go to turn it and you pull and those stitches come out. So we're going to back stitch more than just like 2 stitches. And if you're newer machines, they automatically only back stitch like 1 or 2 stitches. Do it again. Come forward a couple of stitches and go back a couple of stitches. And we're going to go around, and don't push your fabric through. Let the machine do all the work. And we're going to go around the edges. And we're just letting the machine do all the work. And I got off there, but I'm keeping my line with the bottom fabric. Go around and around. And again, back stitching. Okay, we have this curve here. Now we could notch it, but when you notch and you turn it, it's not going to be smooth. So a little secret is we're going to come above the curve And this little foot's really cool because it's meant to do like on the edge. So it has a little notch to tell me, and I just gonna come a needle width from the original stitching, and I'm gonna stitch that curve again. So I have 2 rows of stitching. Now, if you have totally foobarred your circle, you can flip it around, use your seam allowance, your guide, and stitch it this way, because a lot of times when you stitch it, you'll start pulling to one side and it will be lopsided. It won't be perfectly circle. So you can flip it the other way and you'll have all your stitches. So now, instead of clipping, we're going to cut right next to this second row of stitches. And we're going to cut a lot of the seam allowance off. Just kind of trim it down a little bit. I'll do the same thing over here. And we're going to work that seam allowance with our fingers. And we have a nice, and we're going to just roll it with our fingers. And I'm going to roll it while I sew. If this makes you a little nervous, this is when you press it. Just take it through your iron. Probably it needs a little bit of steam because of the type of fabric this is. And just roll it with your fingers and do it. I'm just going to roll it as I sew. If you're sewing it for yourself, it didn't have to be perfect. We're just practicing, and it's just going to be shit on anyways, so it's fine. Okay, this foot is really cool because of the little divot right there that allows me to edge stitch. When I do this, my fingers are actually against the seam allowance. That's the seam allowance is like right there, and I'm going to be pushing that going out. Okay. This is where the seam allowance narrows, so my finger's going to be really close to the machine. We want to make it really smooth and even against the curve. You're going to get some baconing. This is not really a big issue. It's going to be more on the curve than on the straights. That's because we're pulling the fabric and it's stretchy, and we're using 2 different weights of fabric. We got the fleece underneath and we got the French terry on top. We're going to steam the hell out of it with our iron, and it's really going to make it okay. At the end of the video, I will show you another turned and top stitch pre-flat that I have that we have used several times, and just coming out of the dryer, it's fine. It's not doing this. Most of the baconing you get with your store-bought flats are because they're not properly prepped. This fabric, the French terry we wash the French terry we wash about 3 times on hot, and we dry it on hot, and then it has been dyed and washed again on hot and dried on hot. The fleece I do like 4 or 5 times because it's so heavy, and I use a combination of hemp and bamboo, and the hemp needs a little bit more prep, and it's not going to shrink any more than this. We're really just kind of pulling it with our stitches, which is why you want to use a long stitch, so you're not pushing those fibers outwards. And that's why you get it on the curve, because you're just pushing it out with the stitches. Alright, we're going to go pin this into our pre-flat and sew our pre-flat. Alright, come back with us. Okay, if you have purchased some of our fabulously dyed fabric, now is the time that you're going to need to decide which side you're going to see and which side is going to go inside. This one is my favorite because it's dark and has less purple, and I just think it's prettier. This has a lot of light. I don't know. The color variation. No, I'm going to go with the dark on the outside. Okay, so this is going to be our inside. So our insert is going to be right here. So when it's all folded up, that's how it's going to do. So we're going to put right sides together. And the big points that we want to make sure we pin the same are going to be here on our curves. So I'm going to clip on the top of the curve, on the top of the curve. We want the inside, inside curve, so coming around, I'll clip it right there. We want these to match up. Get the top of that curve there. We'll do the same thing here. We're not trying to lay the whole thing flat and even. We want to match our curves. When you sit there and try to figure out how to do that, you'll be here all day trying to line your fabric up, and you'll never get to sew. So I'm going to pull this there. Oops, flip that straight. And then line it up for that. Flip it there. And I'll clip it there. Now, for this, we got 2 fabrics, and I'm going to tug it a little bit so it hangs out. And the reason I do that is so I am sure that I'm capturing all layers of that fabric in that insert. Okay. Now, we need to pick a good place to turn, because when we turn, you're going to kind of see it, it'll be a little off. And I'm going to put it right here on the back side. Just right in the middle. And when I'm sewing around, I'm going to start here, sew all the way around. So I'm going to put 2 clips, so I know when I get to the 2 clips, that's where I'm going to stop. Because I get on a roll and I just go around and I won't stop. And we'll go ahead and put one here. Alright, let's take it back to the machine. We're going to start here. We're going to go all the way around. We're going to do another little treatment right here. We're going to come back and zigzag it when we're done. Back stitch here, back stitch when we're done. I can see the fleece, I see the French terry, there's the one side, there's the other side. When I come through with my seam allowance, I know I've captured all of the fabric. When we're done going all the way around with the straight stitch, we're going to come back and we're going to reinforce this. I like to use a zigzag because it kind of compresses all the fabric together. Let's go to the machine. Now we're going to go around this. Again, this is where we're going to turn. You want to go several stitches. Go several stitches back. Because when you turn it and you start pulling out stitches, you're going to be pissed. Let the machine feed the fabric. Don't push or pull the fabric, especially around these curves. It's wrinkling up. I'm just going to kind of, with the needle down, release the pressure foot. And it's kind of bunching up again. Just kind of release it. Here's that inside curve. Perfect. Alright, now we're about to sew through a lot of fabric. We have the insert seam allowance, and the inside and outside. So we're going through what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of fabric. Remember that your stitch length is not the length of the stitch. It's how much thread is being released on each pass. So depending on your machine, this part, and only this part, you might have to help your machine through it. Okay, so right here where my finger is, we're just now coming to it. Looks good. What I always get hung up on is because I use these older machines and they're designed to sit flush in a cabinet. The pins and the fabric will get caught on this corner. And here we're coming up to our double pin. So back, tack it really good. Alright, now remember what we had talked about? These curves. So these little curved edges, we're just going to come back around. Outside curves, not inside curves. So this little outside curve, tuck that thread into that pressure foot. We're just going to come a needle width away. Follow that little curve. So that's one. Get all the thread under. This pressure foot's broken, so it kind of gets janky on me. Do this other. I don't really think these are curved enough to make a difference, but we'll go ahead. It's a broken one. We'll go ahead and just go around it anyways. And I'm too lazy to start and stop it, so I'm going to go all the way around. Alright, and remember when we talked about doing something here? I'm going to put it on a zigzag. Get this thread. And just right here, I'm going to zigzag this fabric down. And I'm actually going to go once and I'll go twice. Alright, so let's trim our seam allowances and turn it. Do not trim your seam allowances, but where you're going to turn it. You have to have enough fabric to give it a turn and to top stitch it and to make it secure. Trim your seam allowances around your curves, around the inside curve, and that can be trimmed more. But not where you're going to turn it. Second. I'm rolling the seam allowance with my fingers, getting the stitches, the seam even. My beautiful curved wings. Okay. It should roll under the proper amount of seam allowance because we kind of forced it on either side. You might see the little threads. You want to pull them. And get it straight and smooth. And then cut your little threads. Cut those threads. Alright. We want to top stitch on the top. We don't want to do it on the back side where the insert is. We want to make sure that it looks nice and neat on the outside where we see it. That's why it's called top stitching. Alright, let's start right here. And if it makes you nervous that you can't get this straight, go iron it.
Hold up. Going inside.
This is my opening. Keeping them flush. Oops, I still have it on zigzag. Alright. I'm going to back stitch it. And again, I'm pushing the seam allowance out while I sew with my finger. That's what I'm holding. Let the curves work themselves. I don't like the way this looks. I remember one of the first things I learned how to sew 100 years ago was a Maya wrap for my oldest son. And on the directions, because there was no YouTube, the lady said that you might not be able to sew a whole Maya wrap, but you can sew a 1/2 inch at a time. And just think of it like that. You might not be able to sew a whole diaper, but you can sew a 1/2 inch at a time. And we just need to get to this point and get to this point. And before you know it, we're done. Okay, here we come on the insert. So we want to make sure that this is straight, otherwise we will sew the insert, it will be all cattywampus. And again, our stitches are going to get really, really tight here, because it's not a stitch length, it's how much thread is released. And now we're going through a ton. We're going through 6, now we're going through 8. And I'm going to kind of give it a little push, not too much push, you'll break your needle. Let's readjust. Oh, that's getting thick again. It won't go over the last little hump. Ah, there it goes. I just used my hand crank to give it a little strength. Alright, don't look now, but you just made a diaper. Go steam it on the bacony little bits. Let's see. Oh, it's pretty good. A little bit on the curves. It's a little bit of bacon in the insert. But go steam it really, really good. And you're done. Congratulations.